One network called it sabotage, another called it room to run. This is Parallax Newsroom. Vox saw a sabotage attempt where the Washington Times saw room to run. The Supreme Court allowed a Trump administration order altering mail-in voting rules to proceed, while litigation continues. Vox framed the ruling as an attempt to, in their words, sabotage the 2026 election, casting the court as enabling voter suppression. NPR took a more measured approach, calling it an interim win for Trump, while noting that hurdles loom for full implementation. The Washington Times focused on the logistical mechanics, reporting that the court gave Trump room to run on a plan to have the post office police mail-in ballots. The read, Vox emphasized the threat to electoral integrity, using the word sabotage to signal deliberate disenfranchisement, but omitted the interim nature of the ruling and the pending lower court challenges. NPR acknowledged both the win and the obstacles, giving viewers the procedural context that Vox skipped. The Washington Times centered the postal logistics, framing the ruling as executive empowerment rather than voter impact. Notably, Axios paired its straight reporting with a second piece raising fears of federal overreach, an angle absent from the right-leaning coverage. The verifiable fact is a stay allowing the order to proceed. Whether it constitutes sabotage or reform depends entirely on which outlet you read. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent, calling the ruling a Kafkaesque nightmare, highlighted by The Hill, was ignored by right-leaning outlets entirely. Breitbart cataloged El-Sayed's policy dodges, where The Hill spotlighted his on-air frustration. Abdul El-Sayed's Fox News interview with Jesse Watters devolved into crosstalk over immigration, foreign policy, and culture war issues. The Hill described a candidate sparring with the host, quoting El-Sayed asking to answer the question, framing the segment as a combative but substantive exchange. CNN kept its coverage brief, noting El-Sayed was confronted about culture wars without detailing specific clashes. Breitbart ran multiple follow-ups isolating individual moments. El-Sayed on reparations, on the Green New Deal, on the Second Amendment, and on gender-affirming care for minors. The New York Post seized on a single exchange about circumcision, calling it bizarre. The read, The Hill gave viewers the broadest picture, naming immigration, Iran, and gas prices as topics, which is verifiable from the transcript. Breitbart's approach was surgical, breaking the interview into discrete policy positions and framing each as a dodge or radical stance, omitting the hostile questioning that prompted the responses. The Post reduced a lengthy policy interview to a single provocative question, stripping all context. CNN's lean left coverage was notably thin, mentioning the confrontation but not the substance, which is an omission across left-leaning outlets that largely ignored the interview. The word bizarre, used by the Post, does the heaviest lifting, turning a rhetorical counter-question into a character assessment without engaging the underlying policy debate. Democracy Now! Called it stupid, where Axios found Canada cheering. The United States and Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs on each other after trade negotiations collapsed. Democracy Now! Quoted critics calling it the most stupid trade fight in history, emphasizing that workers in both countries stand to lose. The Guardian framed the dispute through Mark Carney's defense of French language protections, positioning Canada as protecting cultural sovereignty. Axios reported that Carney's defiance of Trump has Canada cheering, framing the Canadian Prime Minister as a national hero. The Washington Times noted that Vice President Vance called Canada a state, a remark the outlet labeled a Freudian slip, and reported new tariffs as talks collapsed. Breitbart quoted former Vice President Pence warning that a trade war is the last thing the economy needs. The read, Democracy Now! Centered labor, a frame entirely absent from the other outlets, and used the word stupid to signal futility rather than strategy. Axios and The Guardian both elevated Carney, but Axios made him a triumphant figure while The Guardian focused on a specific policy red line, language rights, that gives the dispute a concrete stake. The Washington Times uniquely flagged Vance's verbal slip, which other outlets ignored, while also noting a separate Supreme Court ruling that struck down Trump tariffs and blew $1 trillion hole in the budget, a budgetary consequence no left or center outlet mentioned. Pence's dissent, reported by Breitbart, fractures the right's usual trade war alignment. The Hill counted $800,000, where NBC News counted skeptical Trump supporters. A Trump-aligned super PAC spent over $800,000, supporting Darline Graham in a South Carolina Senate runoff. The Hill reported the dollar figure and the PAC, MAGA Inc., as a straightforward financial transaction in the race. NBC News framed the story around division, noting that some Trump supporters are not sold on Graham, implying the spending may not unify the base. Fox News pivoted away from the spending entirely, focusing on Graham being pressed on affordability plans and reporting that Republicans in key races warn Trump's economic plan goes too far. The Washington Times confirmed the $827,000 expenditure on the runoff's final day. The read, The Hill and the Washington Times agreed on the basic dollar figure, around $827,000, which is verifiable from FEC filings. NBC News shifted the lens from the money to the voters, asking whether the expenditure can buy enthusiasm, a question neither center nor right outlets raised. Fox News made the most striking editorial choice, ignoring the super PAC spending to focus on Republican dissent over Trump's own economic proposals, specifically cheaper beef, which fractures the expected pro-Trump framing. The word pressed used by Fox implies Graham struggled, a characterization the Washington Times, which simply reported the check being cut, did not echo. What all sides omitted is whether the late spending actually moved polling, a measurable fact none of them provided. Across all four stories, left outlets reached for moral language, center outlets reached for dollar figures and procedure, and right outlets reached for internal dissent and logistics. Subscribe for the framing gap.